Priya Sharma stood in the corridor of Leelavati Hospital at 3:47 in the morning, her feet aching in shoes that had stopped fitting properly 6 months ago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency that made exhaustion feel like it had weight, like it was pressing down on her shoulders with physical force. She'd been on shift for 16 hours. Another patient had just coded in the ICU. They brought him back, but barely. And now she was supposed to go home, except home meant a cramped two-bedroom flat in Inderi, where her mother would still be awake, worrying, and her father would be asleep in the hospital bed they'd rented and installed in the living room. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, already knowing what she'd see. Another bill. Her father's physiotherapy center, reminding her that payment was overdue. 17,000 rupees. She had maybe 3,000 in her account. Her salary was decent for a nurse in Mumbai, but decent didn't cover a stroke victim's rehabilitation, her brother's engineering college fees, rent, and the basic mathematics of survival in a city that ate money like it was air. Priya was 26 years old and beautiful in a way she'd stopped noticing. Dark hair she kept in a practical bun, brown eyes that patients said were kind, a face that showed her exhaustion more clearly each month. She graduated top of her nursing class 4 years ago, had dreamed briefly of studying abroad, maybe becoming a doctor, maybe having a life that belonged to her instead of being divided into pieces and distributed to everyone who needed something from her. That dream had died the same day her father collapsed at his office, his brain starving for oxygen while he was supposed to be reviewing municipal contracts. The stroke had been massive. He'd survived, but everything after survival was expensive. The government hospital had done what it could. Everything else fell to Priya. She walked to the changing room, pulled off her scrubs, changed into jeans and a kurta that had been new 2 years ago. Her reflection in the mirror looked older than 26. She tried to remember the last time she'd gone out with friends, done something that wasn't work or worry, maybe 6 months ago, maybe longer. Her friends from nursing school had mostly stopped calling. They were tired of her canceling plans, tired of conversations that always circled back to money and responsibilities. The auto rickshaw ride home took 40 minutes through Mumbai's pre-dawn quiet. She watched the city pass, this place she'd lived her entire life, but that still felt like it belonged to someone else, someone with money, someone whose father hadn't gotten sick at exactly the wrong time. Her mother was awake when Priya walked in, sitting at the small kitchen table with tea gone cold. Lakshmi Sharma looked at her daughter with the particular expression mothers develop when they're proud and heartbroken simultaneously. "You're working too much," her mother said in Hindi. "This isn't sustainable. We need the money," Priya replied, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Your aunties are saying things about your age, about marriage." Priya felt something hot and bitter rise in her throat. Her aunties, her father's sisters who contributed nothing financially but had endless opinions about how Priya should be married by now, how she was getting too old, how no good family would want a bride who worked night shifts at a hospital, who smelled like disinfectant and death. "Let them say things," Priya said. "I'm not marrying some man they choose just so they can stop gossiping about me." Her mother looked down at her cold tea. "I know, Beta, but I worry. You're sacrificing everything. Your youth, your future." "What future?" Priya thought but didn't say. She kissed her mother's head, checked on her father who was sleeping fitfully in the converted living room, and went to her own small bedroom. She lay down without undressing, too tired even for that, and stared at the ceiling until sleep came. 3 weeks later, Priya met Meera at Trident Hotel in Bandra Kurla complex. Meera had been her roommate in nursing school, had married a software engineer, and now lived what Priya thought of as a normal life, a life with weekends and dinner parties and conversations about things other than medical bills. The cafe Meera had chosen was expensive, all marble and soft lighting and prices that made Priya nervous. But Meera insisted, said she needed to get Priya out of her routine, needed to remind her what life looked like outside the hospital and that suffocating flat. "You look exhausted," Meera said, not unkindly. "I am exhausted," Priya replied. "But tell me about your life. Tell me something good." They talked for an hour about Meera's husband's promotion, about a vacation they were planning to Goa, about normal, beautiful, boring things that Priya listened to like they were fairy tales. The cafe around them filled with people who belonged in places like this. Businessmen, wealthy families. A group of Arab men in traditional dress sitting near the window, talking in low voices about something that sounded important. "Medical tourists," Meera said, following Priya's gaze. "Mumbai gets a lot of them, Gulf Arabs mostly, coming for procedures they don't trust their own hospitals to do. They stay at hotels like this, hire private doctors, spend money like water." "Must be nice," Priya said without bitterness, just stating fact. One of the men at that table glanced over. He was older, maybe early 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and beard. His eyes met Priya's for just a moment, and something in his expression was thoughtful, curious, not the usual way men looked at her. Then he looked away and she forgot about it. Mira had to leave for a dinner party with her husband's colleagues. Priya stayed to finish her coffee, expensive enough that wasting it felt criminal. She was about to pay and leave when someone spoke behind her. "Excuse me." The accent was Arabic, the English perfect, educated somewhere abroad. The older man from the table by the window stood a respectful distance away. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I overheard you and your friend talking." "You're a nurse?" Priya turned, surprised. "Yes, at Lilavati Hospital, ICU." His face brightened with what seemed like genuine interest. "I'm here for consultations. Cardiac issues. And I have to say, the nurses at the hospital I visited today were extraordinary. More knowledgeable than some doctors I've met in London." Priya found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "We have to be. The patient-to-nurse ratio here means we're often the first line of diagnosis. We notice things doctors miss because we're there all the time." "Exactly," he said. He gestured to her table. "May I? Just for a moment. I find your perspective fascinating." She should have said no, should have paid and left. But his interest seemed genuine, not predatory, and she was so tired of conversations about bills and duties and sacrifice. So she said yes. His name was Rashid Al-Mansouri. He was from Dubai, in Mumbai, for a series of consultations with cardiologists about arrhythmia issues he'd been having since a minor heart attack 2 years earlier. He'd lost his wife to cancer 18 months ago, had 2 adult children, both married with their own lives. He ran a construction company his father had founded, built luxury developments across the Emirates. He asked about her work and listened like her answers mattered. Asked about her training, her patients, her views on healthcare in India versus abroad. She found herself talking more than she had in months, about the challenges of working in an understaffed ICU, about how nurses were treated like servants instead of medical professionals, about the satisfaction of saving lives despite impossible odds. "You care deeply," he said after she'd talked for 20 minutes. "That's rare. Most people in any profession lose that passion." "You haven't. I can't afford to lose it," Priya said. Then, surprising herself, she told him about her father, about the stroke and the bills and the weight of being the family's only real income. She didn't know why she was being so honest with this stranger. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because he was leaving soon, and her confessions wouldn't matter. Rashid listened with an expression that reminded her of her father before the stroke, when he used to listen to her talk about her dreams. Attentive, respectful, present. "You're carrying too much," he said quietly. "That's not weakness to acknowledge. That's just arithmetic. One person can't hold up a whole family indefinitely." "But I have to," Priya said. "Do you? Or is that what everyone has told you until you believed it?" The question hung between them. It was fully dark outside now, Mumbai's lights reflecting off the cafe's windows. Rashid glanced at his watch. "I should let you go," he said. "But if you'd allow it, I'd like to continue this conversation. Dinner tomorrow, perhaps? I know very few people here, and I'm finding the city overwhelming alone." Priya knew she should refuse, knew this was how things started that shouldn't start. But something in her was desperate for this, for conversation with someone who saw her as something other than a nurse or a daughter or a financial solution. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." They met for dinner the next night at a restaurant in Colaba that Priya couldn't have afforded on her own. Rashid ordered dishes she'd never tried, asked permission before ordering wine, told stories about growing up in Dubai when it was barely a city, before the towers and the money and the transformation into something that barely resembled its past. He was educated, had studied economics at London School of Economics, spoke 4 languages. But he didn't perform his wealth or education. He spoke to her like an equal, asked her opinion on things, listened to her answers. Over the next 2 weeks, they met 6 more times. Coffee became lunch, became long walks along Marine Drive, where the Arabian Sea stretched out forever, and the city noise became bearable. He told her about his late wife, Fatima, how they'd had an arranged marriage that became genuine love, how her death had left him hollow in ways his children couldn't fill. He missed partnership, he said, missed having someone to talk to about life beyond business deals and family obligations. Priya told him things she'd never told anyone, about feeling trapped by duty, about loving her family but resenting them, about the dreams she'd abandoned so completely she could barely remember what they'd felt like, about being 26 and feeling like her life had already ended before it properly began. On their 8th meeting, Rashid took her to a quieter beach in Versova. The sun was setting, turning the polluted water into something almost beautiful. They sat on a bench while evening walkers passed, families and couples and people whose problems seemed smaller than hers. "Priya," he said carefully, "I need to return to Dubai in 3 days. My visa is expiring, and I have work that can't wait any longer." She'd known this was temporary, had told herself not to get attached. But the thought of going back to her life without these conversations felt suffocating. "I don't want this to end," he continued. "These past weeks with you have reminded me what it feels like to connect with someone intellectually and emotionally, to see someone for who they actually are, not what their role demands." She looked at him, this man 26 years older than her, from a culture she barely understood, offering something she couldn't quite name. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying I want you in my life, permanently. I know this is sudden. I know we're from different worlds. But those worlds aren't as different as they seem. We're both trapped by duty, both sacrificing ourselves for families and expectations. I'm offering you a partnership marriage, a life where you're not carrying everything alone." Priya stared at the darkening ocean. This was insane. She barely knew him. He was old enough to be her father. She'd be moving to a foreign country with laws and customs she didn't understand. But he was also kind, educated, financially stable in ways she'd never be. He saw her as a person, not a caretaker or a burden. And maybe most importantly, he was offering escape from the bills and the guilt and the weight of expectations that had been crushing her since her father's stroke. "Your family," she said, "they'll hate me." "Probably," he admitted. "My children see me as their father, not as a man who might want companionship. They'll think you're after my money. But they're adults with their own lives. This is my choice, not theirs. And I'm supposed to just leave everything, my job, my family, my whole life." "Your job is killing you slowly," he said gently. "Your family will survive. They were surviving before you became their only support. You're not responsible for fixing everyone's problems. And as for your life, maybe this is your chance to actually have one instead of just surviving." Priya felt tears on her face before she realized she was crying. From exhaustion, from hope, from terror at what she was actually considering. "Think about it," Rashid said. "I fly back in 3 days. If you want this, truly want it, I'll arrange everything. Visa, wedding, all of it. If you don't, I'll understand and disappear from your life. But please consider that you deserve more than the cage you're in." She thought about it for 2 days. Barely slept. Talked to no one because who would understand? Her mother would be scandalized. Her friends would think she was crazy or calculating. Her aunties would have opinions that mattered not at all. On the morning of Rashid's departure, Priya met him at his hotel. He was checking out, his bags packed, looking resigned to her absence. "Yes," she said simply. His face transformed with relief and something that looked like genuine joy. "Yes, yes to all of it. To Dubai, to marriage, to trying. I don't know if I love you yet, but I respect you, and I think that's more than most people start with. And you're right, I deserve more than what I have." They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at a marriage hall in Mumbai. Hindu rituals in the morning, Islamic nikah in the evening, a blending of traditions that satisfied no one but them. Her mother cried throughout. Her brother looked confused. Her father, wheeled in for the ceremony, blessed her with shaking hands and eyes that understood more than he could say. Rashid's children didn't attend. They called to offer cold congratulations that everyone pretended were warm. 3 days after the wedding, Priya Sharma became Priya Al-Mansouri and boarded a flight to Dubai with her new husband, leaving behind the only life she'd known for the promise of something bigger. The plane lifted into cloudless sky, and she looked down at Mumbai disappearing below, that city of struggle and survival, and felt something between liberation and terror. She didn't know yet that liberation and terror often felt identical, that escape sometimes meant running from one cage directly into another, that the man beside her, so kind and respectful during their courtship, came with his own traps that wouldn't be visible until they'd already closed around her. But for now, flying toward an unknown life in an unknown country, Priya let herself believe in the possibility of happiness, in second chances, in the idea that maybe, just maybe, sacrifice could end and living could begin. The seatbelt light turned off and she exhaled deeply, letting go of everything behind her, reaching toward everything ahead. Dubai glittered in her imagination like a promise, like salvation, like the answer to every prayer she'd stopped believing would be heard. She didn't know yet that prayers sometimes get answered in ways that destroy you. The villa in Emirates Hills took Priya's breath away the first time she saw it. White stone and glass rising 3 stories. palm trees lining the circular driveway, a fountain in the entrance courtyard that probably cost more than her family's flat in Mumbai. Rashid pulled the Mercedes through the gates, and she sat in the passenger seat trying to process that this was supposedly home now. Her home. The word felt foreign in her mouth. "Welcome," Rashid said, smiling at her expression. "I know it's overwhelming. It was for me too when I first bought it. You'll get used to it." But Priya wasn't sure she would. Inside was marble everywhere, high ceilings with crystal chandeliers, rooms that served purposes she couldn't immediately identify. A formal living room no one seemed to use, a dining room with a table that seated 16, a kitchen larger than her entire Mumbai flat, staffed by a Filipino housekeeper named Maria, who smiled politely and spoke English with an accent different from any Priya had heard. "Your room is upstairs," Maria said, and Priya realized she meant their room, hers and Rashid's, the master suite that overlooked the pool and had a bathroom with heated floors and a shower that felt like standing in warm rain. Rashid was patient those first weeks, gave her time to adjust, didn't pressure her physically beyond what she was comfortable with. He showed her how things worked, introduced her to the few people he considered actual friends rather than business associates, took her shopping on Sheikh Zayed Road where the malls were bigger than anything in Mumbai, and salespeople treated her like royalty because she was with Rashid Al-Mansouri. He bought her clothes she would never have chosen for herself, designer labels she'd only seen in magazines, dresses and heels and handbags that cost what she used to make in 3 months. At first she protested, but he insisted. "You're my wife now. You represent our family. You should look the part. The part." Priya wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but she learned quickly. It meant dressing a certain way, speaking softly in public, smiling at his friends' wives, wealthy Emirati women who spoke to her in careful English and looked at her with polite curiosity, like she was an interesting artifact Rashid had brought back from his travels. His children visited 2 weeks after she arrived. Khalid was 30, worked in his father's company, had his father's build but none of his warmth. Amira was 27, married to a government official, pregnant with her second child. They came for dinner, supposedly to welcome Priya, actually to inspect her. "So you're a nurse," Khalid said over appetizers that Priya couldn't identify. "That must be very different from this." He gestured vaguely at the dining room, the villa, the life. His tone was polite, but his meaning was clear. "You don't belong here. You're a gold digger who trapped our grieving father." Priya felt Rashid tense beside her. "She is a medical professional," he said quietly. "An ICU nurse. Do you have any idea the level of skill and knowledge that requires?" "I'm sure it's very impressive," Amira said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "And I'm sure you'll be very happy here. It's quite a change from Mumbai, I imagine." The evening was torture. Every comment felt barbed. Every question felt like an interrogation. "Where exactly did your family live? What did your father do before his illness? How did you meet our father again?" They knew the answers already. They just wanted to hear her say them, wanted her to admit she'd been poor and desperate, and their father had been her salvation. When they finally left, Rashid apologized. "They're protective," he said. "They'll come around once they see how happy you make me." But Priya had seen the truth in their eyes. They would never come around. She would always be the interloper, the foreign nurse who'd married their father too soon after their mother's death. The days found their rhythm. Rashid left early for his office, returned late smelling of cologne and stress. Priya had nothing to do. The house was cleaned by Maria. Food was cooked by a chef who came 3 times a week to prepare meals. There was a driver named Ahmed if she wanted to go anywhere. But where would she go? She knew no one. Spoke minimal Arabic. The city beyond the villa gates was air-conditioned and enormous and utterly impersonal. She tried to stay useful by managing Rashid's health. His heart problems were worse than he'd initially admitted. He took 6 different medications at specific times, had dietary restrictions he regularly ignored, was supposed to do moderate exercise that his work schedule made impossible. Priya took over completely, organizing his pills in daily containers, preparing the meals his doctor had recommended, gently reminding him to walk for 30 minutes each evening. He was grateful for her attention. Kept saying how lucky he was to have married a medical professional, how Fatima had never understood his health issues the way Priya did. And Priya felt useful again for the first time since arriving. Being a wife was foreign and uncomfortable. Being a nurse was familiar. She could do this part. But the isolation was crushing. She tried to make friends with other expat wives at the few social events Rashid brought her to. There was a British woman named Claire married to an oil executive, an American woman named Jennifer, whose husband worked in real estate. They were polite, but their lives revolved around tennis clubs and charity luncheons and concerns that felt absurd to Priya. They complained about their housekeepers, about how hard it was to find good private schools, about the heat. Priya sat through their conversations and said nothing because what could she say? That she missed working? That she missed having purpose? That this luxury felt like suffocation? They wouldn't understand. They'd chosen this life. Priya had chosen escape and gotten this instead. Rashid began discouraging her from spending time with them anyway. Those women don't understand real life, he said. They're just passing through Dubai, killing time while their husbands make money. You're different. You're actually building a life here, part of a real family. So Priya stopped accepting their lunch invitations, stayed home, read books, watched the housekeepers work and felt useless, gained weight because there was nothing to do but eat and the chef's food was extraordinary, lost weight because anxiety killed her appetite. Her mood swung wildly and she couldn't tell if it was adjustment or depression or just the reality of her new life settling in. 6 months after her arrival, Rashid had an appointment with his cardiologist. Priya went with him, relieved to be back in a medical environment even as a visitor. The doctor reviewed test results, adjusted medications, and spoke to Rashid in Arabic that excluded Priya until Rashid translated the important parts. His heart was stable but fragile. Stress was his biggest enemy. He needed to reduce work hours, eliminate anxiety, maintain strict medication compliance. In the car afterward, Rashid was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I need to update some documents. The will, the insurance policies. Make sure everything is in order in case something happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Priya said automatically, the nurse in her responding. "Your heart is stable. You just need to follow the protocol." But Rashid shook his head. "I'm 52 with significant cardiac damage. Realistically, I have maybe 10 good years left, maybe less if I'm unlucky. And I need to make sure you're protected if something happens to me." A week later, he told her he'd increased his life insurance and made her the primary beneficiary, $10 million. The number was so large, it didn't feel real. His children would inherit the company, the properties, the investments. But this was for her, for security. So she'd never have to worry about money again. Priya felt something cold move through her chest. The conversation felt premature, morbid, like he was planning his own funeral. But he was so matter-of-fact about it, so logical. And maybe this was how wealthy people thought. Always planning for death, always protecting assets. "Thank you," she said, because what else could she say? But the knowledge sat heavy in her mind. $10 million, more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Hers if Rashid died. She pushed the thought away immediately, horrified that it had even formed. But it had. And once thought, it couldn't be unthought. The control started so gradually that Priya didn't recognize it as control. Rashid began asking where she'd been when she went out, who she'd talked to, what they'd discussed. "Just curiosity," he said. "Just wanting to know about her day." But his questions felt like inventories, like he was checking her answers against some internal list. He started checking her phone. Casually, while they watched television, he'd pick it up and scroll through her messages. When she protested, he looked hurt. Why would you care unless you have something to hide? We're married people, don't keep secrets. So Priya stopped protesting. Let him look. There was nothing to find anyway. She barely talked to anyone. Her mother called weekly, but their conversations were surface level. Priya performing happiness because admitting struggle would confirm every auntie's prediction about this marriage being a mistake. When Priya mentioned wanting to volunteer at a hospital, maybe use her nursing skills even just part-time, Rashid's face clouded. "Why would you want to do that? You're my wife now. You don't need to work. It would be embarrassing, actually. People would think I can't provide for you." "I just miss nursing," Priya said. "Miss feeling useful." "You are useful," Rashid replied. "You manage my health, you manage this house, you're learning to be part of this culture. That's important work. Why do you need validation from strangers?" His logic always sounded reasonable until later, when Priya replayed the conversations in her mind and realized they weren't logic at all. They were control disguised as concern. She started researching Emirati divorce law late at night when Rashid was asleep. The information she found was terrifying. Foreign wives had minimal rights. Custody almost always went to fathers, especially for young children. Assets remained with the husband unless specifically designated otherwise. Women could be deported immediately after divorce, their residence visas canceled. Priya was legally and financially trapped. Everything she had came through Rashid. The visa, the credit cards, the access to money. If the marriage ended, she'd return to India with nothing except maybe that insurance policy, and even that could be contested. She thought about leaving anyway, just buying a ticket and going home. But home to what? Her father's medical bills hadn't stopped. Her brother still needed college funding. Her mother was getting older. Priya's brief period as Rashid's wife had allowed her family to stabilize financially. If she came back, she'd be right where she started, except worse, because she'd be divorced. Damaged goods in her community's eyes, unemployable after 2 years away from nursing. The trap was complete. Perfect. Legal. She'd walked into it willingly, and now every door had closed behind her. The arguments started after their first anniversary, small things that escalated. Rashid didn't like how she'd arranged furniture in the living room. She'd spoken too freely at a dinner with his business associates. She'd gained weight and needed to exercise more. She'd lost weight and looked sick. She didn't pray enough, didn't attend mosque, wasn't making enough effort to embrace Islam properly. Everything she did was wrong. Everything she was insufficient. The kind, gentle man she'd married in Mumbai seemed like a performance that had ended. This was the real Rashid, controlling, critical. Certain that he'd saved her and she owed him everything. One evening, after a particularly harsh criticism about how she'd embarrassed him in front of his friends, Priya locked herself in the bathroom and stared at her reflection. She was 28 years old. She lived in a palace. She had access to unlimited money. And she was more trapped than she'd ever been in that cramped Mumbai flat. She thought about the insurance policy. $10 million. Her way out if Rashid died. And Rashid was 53 now with a damaged heart. He wasn't taking care of himself despite her efforts. Stress was killing him slowly. What if it killed him faster? The thought appeared fully formed, and Priya recoiled from it. She wasn't that person. She was a nurse. She saved lives. She didn't think about ending them, but the thought didn't disappear. It sat in the back of her mind like a seed, dark and patient, waiting for the right conditions to grow. And as the months passed, as the villa's walls pressed closer, and Rashid's control tightened, and the impossibility of escape became clearer, that seed found the conditions it needed. Priya began to research. Just academically, she told herself. Just theoretically. Cardiac medications, drug interactions, things a nurse should know for managing her husband's health, nothing more. But late at night, alone with her laptop while Rashid slept, she searched for other things, untraceable methods, symptoms that mimicked natural death, how to make a murder look like the heart attack everyone expected eventually anyway. She was just curious, just thinking, just considering possibilities in case they ever became necessary. That's what she told herself, that she hadn't decided anything, that she was still a good person who would never actually do what she was researching. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in March, 18 months after Priya had arrived in Dubai. Rashid collapsed in the hallway between their bedroom and his study, clutching his chest, his face gray with pain. Priya heard the thud of his body hitting marble and ran from the kitchen where she'd been pretending to care about the menu Maria was planning. She found him gasping, sweating, his hand pressed against his sternum. Every instinct from her years in the ICU kicked in immediately. She checked his pulse, elevated his legs, grabbed his emergency nitrate spray from the bathroom, called for Ahmed to bring the car around while she supported Rashid's weight, got him down the stairs, into the vehicle. The drive to the hospital felt eternal. Rashid's breathing was labored, his skin clammy. Priya held his hand and monitored his pulse and told him to stay with her, stay conscious, just breathe. The nurse in her was calm and efficient. Another part of her, a part she didn't want to examine, was calculating, wondering if this was it, if the decision might be made for her by his failing heart. But they reached the hospital in time. The emergency team stabilized him, ran tests, admitted him for observation. The cardiologist told Priya he'd had a severe angina episode, not a full heart attack, but close. His medication regimen needed adjustment. His stress levels were dangerous. He needed complete rest for at least 2 weeks. Rashid was released 3 days later with new prescriptions and stern warnings. Priya brought him home, settled him in bed, organized his new medications with the same meticulous care she'd always shown. But something had shifted in her during those 3 days. She'd seen how fragile he was, how dependent on her medical knowledge, how easy it would be to make a mistake that no one would question. A nurse managing her husband's complex cardiac medications, who would suspect? His heart was damaged already. Death had been circling him for years. Eventually, it would land, and everyone would nod sadly and say they'd seen it coming. Priya started researching in earnest after that, not at home, where Rashid might see her browser history, where the Wi-Fi might keep logs. She found an internet cafe in Dira, a dingy place frequented by construction workers sending money home, where no one looked twice at a woman in an abaya searching medical databases. She learned about potassium chloride, how it caused cardiac arrest that looked identical to natural heart failure, how it was nearly impossible to detect unless someone specifically tested for it, and why would they test a man with documented heart disease. She learned about digoxin toxicity, how slowly increasing the dose would weaken the heart over time. She learned about the interactions between his various medications, which combinations could be deadly if carefully mismanaged. She told herself she was just gathering information, just understanding her options, just being prepared in case the situation became unbearable enough to require action. But she'd already decided. She just hadn't admitted it yet. The manipulation of his medications started small. She'd skip one dose of his blood thinner, then resume normal administration. Nothing dramatic, just enough to increase clot risk slightly. She'd give him his beta blocker at the wrong time of day, when it would be less effective. She adjusted his diet in subtle ways, more salt than his doctor recommended, foods that stressed his cardiovascular system. Rashid felt worse over the following weeks, more fatigue, occasional chest pain, shortness of breath. He went back to his cardiologist who ran tests, adjusted prescriptions again, told him he needed to reduce stress, that his body was struggling despite medical intervention. No one suspected Priya. Why would they? She was the devoted wife, the trained nurse, the one person managing his health with apparent dedication. When she suggested hiring additional help, a private nurse to monitor him during the day while she ran errands, Rashid and his doctors agreed it was a good idea. It made her look even more innocent. Look how concerned she is. Look how she's bringing in professionals. Clearly, she wants him to survive. Khalid visited more frequently as his father's health declined. He watched Priya with undisguised suspicion but couldn't articulate what bothered him. She was doing everything right. Too right, perhaps. Too perfectly attentive. But suspicion without evidence is just paranoia, and Rashid dismissed his son's concerns. "She's taking better care of me than anyone ever has," Rashid told Khalid during one visit that Priya overheard from the hallway. "Your mother, may she rest in peace, never understood my medical needs. Priya does. I'm lucky to have her." Priya stood outside the door and felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction. Just cold calculation about timeline and opportunity. She'd been researching for 7 months, adjusting his medications for 4. The final act needed to be perfect. Sudden enough to seem like acute cardiac arrest, but expected enough that no one would question it. She needed Rashid to have an episode at home, where she controlled the environment, where she could administer the lethal dose in the chaos of emergency response. The opportunity came in late October. Khalid's family was traveling to London for 2 weeks. Amira was on a religious pilgrimage to Mecca. Rashid's parents were elderly and rarely left their villa. The timing was as perfect as it would ever be. Priya had acquired potassium chloride from a medical supply contact in Mumbai, a former colleague who asked no questions when Priya said she needed it for managing her husband's electrolyte imbalances. She'd stored it carefully, disguised in a vitamin supplement bottle that Rashid never touched. On a Tuesday evening, she prepared Rashid's dinner exactly as his diet required. Grilled fish, steamed vegetables, brown rice. She ate with him, made conversation about nothing important, waited for the right moment. Around 9 that evening, Rashid complained of chest tightness. Not unusual lately, he'd been having minor episodes weekly. But this time, Priya acted alarmed. She called for Ahmed to prepare the car, called the hospital to alert them they were coming, made everything look urgent and appropriate. Then, in the confusion of getting Rashid down the stairs, she administered the injection. Potassium chloride, enough to stop his heart within minutes. She'd practiced the motion dozens of times, knew exactly where to inject so the mark would be invisible among his other medication injection sites. Rashid gasped, clutched at his chest. Ahmed helped him into the car. Priya climbed in beside him, held his hand, watched his face turn gray. His eyes met hers, confused, frightened. Did he know? Could he tell? For just a moment, she thought she saw recognition there, understanding that she'd done this. Then his eyes rolled back and he stopped breathing. Priya started CPR in the moving vehicle, called out instructions to Ahmed to drive faster. She performed the motions perfectly, exactly as trained. But she knew it was theater. Rashid was already dead. His heart had stopped 2 minutes ago and nothing would restart it. They reached the hospital 8 minutes later. The emergency team took over, rushed him inside, worked on him for 23 minutes before calling time of death. Cardiac arrest, the doctor said to Priya, who was crying appropriately in the family waiting area. Given his history, this was unfortunately inevitable. There was nothing anyone could have done. Priya sobbed into her hands and felt absolutely nothing except relief. The next 72 hours were a blur of funeral arrangements and family gatherings and condolences from people who'd never liked her but felt obligated to perform sympathy. She wore black, accepted embraces, spoke in whispers about how sudden it had been, how she tried so hard to save him. Khalid watched her through all of it with eyes that said he knew something was wrong. But knowing and proving are different things entirely. The insurance company called within a week. A $10 million claim required investigation, they explained. Standard procedure. They'd need medical records, interviews with his doctors, a review of the circumstances around his death. Priya provided everything they requested. She was cooperative, grief-stricken, utterly transparent. What did she have to hide? Her husband had died of a heart attack everyone had expected. She'd been managing his care with professional dedication. The doctors all confirmed it. The private nurse she'd hired confirmed it. Even Khalid, for all his suspicion, couldn't point to anything specific she'd done wrong. But Khalid hired a private investigator anyway. He used his father's money to fund a thorough examination of Priya's movements, her communications, her life. And that's when the careful architecture of her crime began crumbling. The investigator found the internet cafe in Dira, found security footage of Priya visiting repeatedly over 7 months, found the cafe's owner who remembered her because foreign women in expensive abayas weren't common in his establishment. The owner mentioned she'd used the same computer each time, always paid cash, always left quickly. The investigator accessed that computer's browser cache, found search histories that had been deleted but not thoroughly enough. Potassium chloride overdose, undetectable cardiac poisons, how to fake medication errors, how to commit the perfect murder. He brought this to Khalid, who brought it to the Dubai police. They'd been ready to close the case, file it as natural death, but this changed everything. They requested an autopsy over the family's objections. Rashid had already been buried according to Islamic custom, but the court ordered exhumation. The toxicology report took 3 weeks. When it came back, it showed elevated potassium levels inconsistent with natural death or medication error, levels that suggested deliberate overdose. The coroner ruled the death suspicious, possibly homicide. Dubai police arrested Priya on a Thursday morning. She was drinking coffee on the villa's terrace when they arrived, thinking about how she'd spend the insurance money once it cleared. Maybe buy her family a proper house, maybe travel, maybe finally be free. She wasn't free. She was being handcuffed and read her rights in Arabic that Ahmed had to translate while Maria watched from the kitchen window with her hand over her mouth. The interrogation lasted 11 hours. They showed her the search histories, the security footage, the timeline of Rashid's declining health corresponding with her medication management, her phone's location data placing her in Dira repeatedly, a paper trail of the potassium chloride order from Mumbai. Priya tried to deny everything at first, then tried to claim she'd been researching for educational purposes, then tried to say Rashid had been abusive, that she'd been trapped, that she'd acted in self-defense, though he'd never actually hit her. Finally, at hour 9, exhausted and realizing the evidence was overwhelming, she confessed. Not emotionally, not with remorse, just factually. Yes, she'd done it. Yes, she'd planned it. Yes, she'd known exactly what she was doing. Why, the detective asked. You had everything. Wealth, status, security. Priya laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I had nothing. I had a cage made of gold, but it was still a cage. I traded one prison for another, and I wanted out. This was the only way. The trial was sensational. International news coverage. Indian nurse murders Arab millionaire husband. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded gold digger who'd seduced a vulnerable widower and killed him for insurance money. The defense tried to argue coercion and abuse, but the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The searches, the planning, the careful execution. Priya's family in Mumbai was destroyed by the publicity. Her mother stopped leaving the house. Her brother dropped out of college from shame. The money Priya had sent them over 2 years was tainted now. Blood money from a murderer. The verdict came after 4 weeks of testimony. Guilty of first-degree murder, mandatory life sentence in Al-Awir Women's Prison. The insurance money went to Rashid's children. Priya's nursing license was permanently revoked in the UAE and India. She was 29 years old and her life was effectively over. Al-Awir Prison was nothing like the villa in Emirates Hills. Concrete walls, metal bars, a cell she shared with 3 other women. No air conditioning, just fans that pushed hot air around. Food that made her stomach hurt. Guards who looked through her like she was already dead. She had decades to think about her choices. About the morning she'd stood in that Mumbai hospital corridor and decided to say yes to a stranger's marriage proposal. about how desperation had looked like opportunity, about how she'd killed a man who'd offered her escape because his escape came with chains she couldn't break any other way. The irony settled over her like a weight. She'd committed murder to be free, and now she'd never be free again. She'd wanted a bigger life and gotten one, just not the kind anyone would choose. She'd married her salvation and then destroyed him, and in doing so destroyed herself more completely than poverty ever could have. Sometimes at night, lying on the thin prison mattress while her cellmate snored, Priya thought about that first evening in the hotel cafe, about Rashid's kind eyes and genuine interest, about the version of this story where she'd said no, stayed in Mumbai, found another way. That version seemed impossible now, like a dream someone else had. She'd wanted everything, had been willing to do anything to get it. And now she had nothing except time and regret, and the understanding that some cages can't be escaped, they can only be exchanged for worse ones. The prison chaplain asked her once if she felt remorse. Priya thought about it honestly before answering. I feel sorry I got caught. I feel sorry my family is suffering. But Rashid? No. He trapped me first. I just trapped him permanently. The chaplain had left without blessing her. Some sins are too calculated for forgiveness. Priya Sharma had killed for freedom and found a different grave, one with bars instead of marble, one where every day was punishment and every night was memory, one where she would stay until her own heart finally stopped, decades from now, and the nurse who'd taken a life would finally lose her own. She'd wanted to escape, she'd succeeded, just not in any direction that led anywhere worth going.